No sirens, no panic, just a strange stillness in the air. That's what many residents along the Gulf Coast described hours before Hurricane Adalia made landfall in the US last week. The skies were calm. The wind had dropped. It felt peaceful. But within hours, the Category 4 hurricane smashed into the coastline, leaving over 200,000 homes without power and causing widespread flooding in 3 states. How can something so violent come after such quiet? The truth is chilling. That silence wasn't safety, it was a warning. Meteorologists call it the calm before the storm. It's a real atmospheric phenomenon that occurs when air pressure drops and wind patterns shift. But to the untrained eye, it's deceptive. It can make people delay evacuations, cancel emergency prep, or ignore weather alerts. And that delay can be deadly. In this special investigation, we'll unpack what really happens before a major storm hits. We'll show you how this quiet isn't nature being kind. It's nature gathering strength. The storm is not always loud when it begins. Sometimes it knocks quietly, right before it tears everything apart. Now let's explore this moment of deceptive calm in detail. To understand the danger of silence before a storm, we must first look at how hurricanes form and behave. A hurricane is not a sudden explosion. It is a highly organized system fed by warm ocean waters, rotating winds, and shifting air pressure. As it intensifies, it undergoes phases, and one of those phases is deceptive quiet. In the case of Hurricane Adalia, meteorological data from the National Hurricane Center showed that air pressure began dropping significantly about 18 hours before landfall. This pressure drop signaled that the storm's core was strengthening. As the hurricane organized, the center of circulation tightened and winds around the eye accelerated. But in areas directly ahead of the eye, the surface winds dropped off temporarily. That's because the air was being pulled upward into the storm rather than rushing across the ground. Wind on the surface died down, cloud cover temporarily cleared, and a sense of tranquility settled over parts of Florida's Gulf Coast. But it was not real tranquility. It was a false signal. Atmospheric silence is often misunderstood. When a hurricane strengthens offshore, it pulls heat and moisture from the ocean into its core. As this upward motion intensifies, it often causes surface winds to slow just before the worst arrives. This gives a misleading impression that the storm may have weakened or diverted, but in reality it's the final breath before impact. This isn't new. In Hurricane Michael, 2018, and Hurricane Laura, 2020, similar calm zones were reported just before catastrophic landfall. The National Weather Service has repeatedly warned that calm winds do not mean the threat is over or has passed. But the issue is not just meteorological, it's psychological. People are hardwired to react to what they can see and hear. No wind, no rain, it must be okay, right? That instinct to downplay invisible or quiet danger is a major barrier in emergency response. In interviews conducted in the aftermath of Adalia, several survivors said they hesitated to evacuate because it looked fine outside, even with active hurricane warnings in place. Some didn't believe the warnings because local skies were bright or winds were still. By the time the eye wall arrived, carrying winds over 130 miles per hour, escape was no longer an option. Let's pause and break down the key indicators that may precede a dangerous storm, even when things appear calm. 1. Sudden drop in barometric pressure. A rapid decrease in pressure is a strong indicator that a system is intensifying. This drop is often invisible to the public without a barometer or proper forecast monitoring. 2. Unusual heat and humidity. The air may feel warmer and heavier. This is due to increased moisture and the draw of warm air into the storm's circulation. 3. Disappearance of winds. As mentioned earlier, winds can drop off before the arrival of the storm's eye or main rain bands. This is a classic case of deceptive calm. 4. Sky appears clearer. In some cases, outer cloud bands are drawn into the storm, leaving a temporary clearing, but that clearing can quickly reverse as the storm closes in. 5. Animal behavior. While anecdotal, increased reports of birds flying inland or pets acting erratically often accompany major shifts in weather systems. These signals, while not scientific proof, have long been noted during natural disasters. This early-stage silence is not unique to hurricanes. It also occurs before tornado outbreaks, tsunamis, and even volcanic eruptions. It's a pattern of natural tension, the environment gathering energy before its release. In fact, one of the most common reasons cited in post-disaster reviews for not evacuating is this exact experience. It was quiet. I thought we had more time. That's where the challenge lies for weather communicators and emergency planners. How do you convince people to act urgently in the absence of visible danger? How do you get someone to trust a forecast when the view from their front porch tells a different story? The answer lies in public education and better risk communication. We must begin to treat silence, not as comfort, but as a variable in the warning system. When the weather is eerily calm before an expected event, it should heighten urgency, not reduce it. Emergency alerts and weather messaging must evolve to reflect this. Instead of only showing radar or wind speeds, forecasters might include public-facing language like, open quote, "Current calm is part of storm structure. Do not let quiet conditions delay action," close quote. This kind of clear, behavior-informed messaging could bridge the gap between science and survival. So what lessons can we take from Hurricane Adalia and those like it? First, never equate silence with safety. Second, understand the mechanics behind that calm. And third, recognize that every moment of calm before a storm is a limited window, perhaps your last chance to prepare. In the next section, we'll dive into the role of barometric pressure, ocean heat content, and how modern satellites detect the signs of an incoming storm, even when all you see is blue sky. Because in storm science, what you can't see can be the most dangerous thing of all. In the hours before Hurricane Adalia slammed into Florida, barometric pressure dropped sharply, a classic signature of a powerful system approaching. But many people weren't watching the data, they were watching the skies. And the skies were clear. What they didn't realize is that this rapid drop in atmospheric pressure is what allows hurricanes to grow fast and strike hard. It's the quiet vacuum that builds the storm's intensity. That's why we're here, to break down the science behind that eerie silence. Because that silence isn't neutral, it's reactive. It tells us something huge is coming. Every storm has a signature, and silence, oddly enough, is one of them. Stay with us as we explain how these early pressure shifts can fool even seasoned residents, and why knowing this pattern could save lives next time. When we talk about hurricanes, the most visible elements, roaring winds, torrential rain, storm surge, grab public attention. But long before any of those are felt, a storm begins its journey silently through a delicate balance of atmospheric and oceanic forces. At the center of this balance is barometric pressure. In the case of Hurricane Adalia, barometers along Florida's coast recorded a sharp decline in pressure about 12 hours before landfall. In meteorological terms, a significant drop in surface pressure, especially one that occurs rapidly, is one of the clearest signs that a cyclone is strengthening. But what exactly does that mean? Barometric pressure is a measure of the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on Earth's surface. In tropical systems, low pressure allows warm, moist air to rise quickly. As it does, it cools and condenses, forming clouds and releasing heat. This process is called latent heat release, and it fuels the storm further. The lower the pressure, the faster this cycle spins. For example, Adalia's pressure dropped from 980 millibars to 954 millibars within just 18 hours. That's a huge shift, and it allowed the storm's winds to intensify from Category 2 to Category 4 in less than a day. This phenomenon is known as rapid intensification, and it's becoming increasingly common in a warming climate. Rapid intensification is dangerous not only because it makes storms stronger, but because it shortens the warning time for communities in the path. Forecasts may call for a Category 1 storm, but by the time it hits, it could be a deadly Category 4. The public, seeing only moderate alerts, may underprepare or stay in place. This is where ocean heat comes in. A hurricane needs fuel, and that fuel comes from warm sea surface temperatures, SSTs, especially those above 26.5 degrees Celsius, around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. But in recent years, not only have SSTs risen, but so has the depth of warm water available. In 2023, the Gulf of Mexico reached record-breaking temperatures, with surface readings exceeding 32 degrees, 89.60 in multiple regions. That means hurricanes like Adalia not only have more energy at the surface, but also more depth to draw from, even as they churn the water. Normally, upwelling cool water from below can weaken a storm. But if even the deeper layers are warm, the storm keeps strengthening. In Adalia's case, satellite sensors detected a layer of anomalously warm water extending 50 to 75 meters deep off the western coast of Florida. That's a massive fuel tank. As the cyclone moved over this area, its intensification accelerated, and wind speeds quickly surpassed 130 miles per hour. But here's where things get deceptive. When a storm is over water and drawing power, many of its visual cues, such as storm bands or thickening clouds, are hidden from land. That means coastal residents may not witness any dramatic visual change. Yet the barometric pressure is falling. The storm is building, and no one can see it. Satellite imagery gives us the eyes we need. NOAA's GOES-16 satellite tracked Adalia in real time. Infrared imaging showed a distinct warming of the eye, a sign that sinking air in the center was intensifying. Meanwhile, the surrounding eye wall cooled sharply, a signal of strong convection and energy release. These signals gave meteorologists early confirmation that rapid intensification was underway. But to the untrained public, satellite imagery can look abstract. That's why real-time forecasting must bridge the gap, translating these invisible signs into actionable messages. Let's break that down. Meteorologists use a tool called the Dvorak technique, developed in the 1970s, to estimate a cyclone's intensity based on satellite imagery patterns, especially when the storm is far from land-based instruments. This technique has become more sophisticated with machine learning, allowing storm structure, pressure, and wind estimates to be calculated almost instantly. During Adalia's development, satellite estimates showed an increase of 30 knots, about 35 miles per hour, in wind speed within 12 hours. That triggered rapid intensification alerts from the National Hurricane Center. Unfortunately, not all emergency agencies, and certainly not all citizens, knew what that meant. This highlights a critical issue in storm preparedness today. The speed of storms has outpaced public understanding. Let's put it plainly, the weather may seem calm, but if barometric pressure is dropping, if sea surface temperatures are high, and if satellite imagery shows symmetrical cloud development, eye formation, the storm is not weakening, it is consolidating power. And that's exactly what happened with Hurricane Adalia. Residents of Taylor, Wakulla, and Franklin counties reported light breezes and patchy sunshine just 6 hours before landfall. Many assumed they still had time. But by that point, the storm was in its final intensification stage. Winds were tightening, surge levels were rising, and evacuation routes were closing. The silence cost hours. Those hours cost lives. Storm surge ended up exceeding 12 feet in some areas, flooding homes and trapping residents. More than 70% of emergency calls received after landfall were from people who had opted to stay because the weather didn't look dangerous. This disconnect between perception and reality must be addressed. So how can we better recognize the invisible signs? Here are 3 core lessons from Adalia. 1. Watch the pressure. If official sources report falling barometric pressure and increasing storm symmetry, take it seriously. Calm air does not mean the threat is over. 2. Trust the forecast, not the window. What you see outside may not reflect the true danger offshore. Rely on radar, satellites, and alerts, not sky color or wind feel. 3. Understand the fuel system. If your region is experiencing record ocean heat, know that this increases the odds of rapid intensification. Even a distant storm can escalate quickly once it enters these zones. Looking ahead, climate models suggest that oceans will continue to warm and that storms will intensify faster closer to land. This shortens evacuation windows and increases the importance of early action, even when the sky looks clear. In the next section, we'll explore the psychological and behavioral dimensions of storm response. Why do so many people ignore warnings? What can be done to shift that pattern? Because if silence before the storm is deadly, then misunderstanding that silence is what truly seals our fate lends. They say animals know before we do. Birds flew inland, dogs barked without cause, yet humans stayed. Why? Because everything seemed normal. During Hurricane Adalia, emergency officials begged coastal residents to evacuate, but many delayed. It doesn't look dangerous, some said. The skies are too clear. But meteorologists knew better. The lack of clouds, the odd warmth, the humidity, all signs of energy building. Nature doesn't always scream its warning. Sometimes it whispers. And if we don't listen, we pay the price. In the next chapter, We'll show how our psychological bias for visible danger can cost us valuable time, and why training communities to recognize invisible threats is now critical in storm-prone regions. As Hurricane Adalia approached, weather stations across Florida were flashing alerts. Warnings were issued. Evacuation orders were released. Forecast models showed a high probability of a major hurricane making landfall within 24 hours. But in many neighborhoods, especially in low-lying coastal areas, people stayed. Why? The answer is more psychological than meteorological. Over decades of storm analysis, emergency planners and behavioral scientists have observed a consistent and troubling pattern. People often underestimate danger when visible conditions don't match the level of warning. This mismatch between perception and scientific data is called risk communication failure, and it's a major contributor to disaster vulnerability. In the hours before Adalia struck, residents in counties like Wakulla and Levy reported blue skies, light winds, and no rain at all. For many, these observations overrode the official guidance. Some delayed preparation. Others decided against evacuating entirely. In fact, preliminary surveys found that over 40% of those in mandatory evacuation zones remained at home, despite clear messaging from local emergency management. The core problem lies in how humans interpret threats. Psychologically, people are wired to respond to immediate, visible stimuli, like dark clouds, heavy rain, or loud thunder. In contrast, early-stage storm conditions often feel neutral, even pleasant. This gap between perceived calm and actual risk creates what experts call the illusion of safety. This illusion is amplified by another phenomenon, normalcy bias. Normalcy bias causes individuals to assume that because something bad hasn't happened before or hasn't happened recently, it won't happen now. So even when scientific data shows a high threat, people default to past experiences. For example, the last hurricane warning wasn't that bad becomes justification for inaction. Unfortunately, storms don't follow memory, they follow physics. And in a storm system like Adalia, where rapid intensification is fueled by high ocean heat and dropping pressure, past outcomes are no longer predictive of future danger. Let's consider a case example. Cedar Key, Florida. In the days leading up to landfall, city officials held press briefings urging residents to evacuate due to forecasted storm surge of up to 10 feet. But because the last major storm that hit the area, Hermine in 2016, caused less damage than expected, many residents viewed Adalia with skepticism. Some even posted online that they were riding it out and not buying the hype. This misjudgment proved costly. Adalia's surge pushed over the seawalls, inundating streets and homes in under 30 minutes. Emergency calls spiked after midnight, too late for rescue in many areas already cut off by floodwaters. The lesson: when warnings are given, visual calm is not a valid counterpoint. Another layer of complexity lies in community communication channels. In rural or tight-knit communities, people often look to neighbors or local leaders for cues on how to act. If those individuals downplay the storm, others follow. This peer influence can either reinforce urgency or spread complacency. For instance, in parts of Dixie County, where only 53% of residents evacuated despite official orders, interviews later revealed that many residents made their decisions based on social media posts from local figures, not from the National Hurricane Center or emergency broadcasts. This creates a dangerous feedback loop where misinformation spreads faster than science. So, what can be done? Improving public response to hurricane threats, especially during deceptive calm, requires more than just better forecasting. It demands targeted behavioral strategies. First, alerts must address how people think, not just what they see. For example, instead of just saying a hurricane is approaching, effective messaging might say, open quote, skies may be clear but pressure is dropping and surge is building. This is the calm before severe impact. Close quote. This type of visual reality disclaimer helps break the link between appearance and action. Second, local voices must be empowered with scientific understanding. If trusted community members are trained to interpret and echo accurate weather information, they can become vital multipliers of truth, not spreaders of doubt. Third, simulations and past case storytelling can help break normalcy bias. When residents are shown exactly what happened in prior storms with similar setups, they are more likely to believe that this time could be worse. Finally, social platforms should be integrated into the emergency system, not treated as afterthoughts. Local governments must actively post real-time, science-based updates across all major channels and monitor misinformation actively. Because every hour of delay during a hurricane countdown matters. And often, those delays happen in the quiet. In summary, the psychology of calm weather is powerful and dangerous. People see blue skies and feel a sense of control. They hear birds chirping and believe things are fine. But when storms like Adalia are accelerating offshore, that quiet is a lie. One that nature tells through physics, and one that society reinforces through habits and misinformation. Understanding this is critical. In the next section, we'll break down how infrastructure and early warning systems are adapting to faster-moving storms, and what role AI, radar networks, and surge simulations can play in ensuring that silence doesn't mislead us ever again. Because in today's climate reality, every calm moment is a countdown, one that must be respected, not ignored. Hurricane Adalia didn't just devastate homes, it exposed a deadly flaw in public response. Silence equals safety. Too many people believe if I don't see wind, if I don't hear thunder, then I'm safe. That belief delayed evacuations in multiple counties. We must correct that mindset. Silence before a storm is not peace, it's pressure. Atmospheric pressure, ocean heat, wind patterns aligning silently. This is where our understanding must evolve. Storms don't always roar when they start. Sometimes they slip in behind a mask of calm. Let's dig deeper into the science of how weather systems mask their danger and how communities can detect and act even when the storm is still quiet. When Hurricane Adalia began to intensify over the Gulf of Mexico, the National Hurricane Center (NHC) issued increasingly urgent warnings. Forecast models were in agreement. Track projections were tightening. Landfall was expected within 36 hours. But as we saw, many communities did not act in time. Despite advances in meteorological modeling, warnings don't always translate into preparedness. The reason? Twofold. First, how fast storms now evolve. Second, how the public perceives time in relation to weather threats. Let's start with the science. Over the last decade, the number of hurricanes undergoing rapid intensification, defined as an increase in wind speed of at least 35 miles per hour, 30 knots, in 24 hours, has grown dramatically. According to a 2023 NOAA study, these events are now nearly twice as common as they were just 30 years ago. Warmer sea surface temperatures, particularly in the Gulf and Caribbean, play a key role. A hotter ocean means more heat energy is available for storms to convert into stronger winds and lower pressure. In the case of Adalia, the system jumped from a Category 1 to a Category 4 hurricane in under 18 hours. This left a narrow response window. And that's a problem because evacuation isn't a one-hour task. It's a logistical challenge, especially for large, low-income or elderly populations. Roads get congested, gas runs out, shelters fill quickly. The faster a storm strengthens, the harder it becomes to coordinate a safe evacuation. This brings us to the core issue, false sense of time. Because the weather looked calm, many residents believed they still had a few more hours, but they misunderstood the difference between visible calm and structural escalation. The radar may not show dense bands overhead yet, but surge was already building offshore and wind shear was dropping, a sign that the hurricane was about to rapidly gain force. Moreover, many residents equate hurricane danger with landfall, not with the pre-landfall stage. But Adalia's storm surge arrived well before the eye made contact with land. In some areas, floodwaters rose 4 feet before the first heavy rain fell. This shows a communication gap, not in technology, but in interpretation. Our alert systems are fast, the data is accurate, the forecasts are narrowing in real time. But the way information reaches and is processed by the public hasn't kept up with the pace of modern hurricanes. In Adalia's case, the rapid intensification alert was issued 20 hours before landfall. That's relatively early, but many emergency managers say they need 24 to 36 hours just to execute a full evacuation. With such a tight window, even a 2-hour delay in community response becomes critical. So what's the solution? Experts now agree it's time to adjust our entire response system to fit the speed of today's storms. Here are key adaptations underway and still needed. 1. pre-positioned response triggers. Rather than waiting for last-minute storm upgrades, some counties are now activating preparations based on ocean temperature anomalies or upper atmosphere trends, days before a system forms. This shifts the mindset from reactive to proactive. 2. AI-powered forecast models. Recent models like NOAA's HAFS, Hurricane Analysis and Forecast System, use machine learning to detect subtle intensification trends up to 36 hours before traditional tools. These help identify which storms are most likely to suddenly accelerate. 3. Targeted alerts, based on risk, not radius. Instead of broad county-wide alerts, new systems are enabling hyperlocal warnings, pinpointing zones likely to flood or suffer wind damage based on topography and infrastructure vulnerability. 4. Silence alerts as a new category. Some meteorologists are pushing for alerts that specifically address dangerous calm conditions. These would explain, open quote, conditions may seem calm, but storm strengthening is confirmed. Action is required immediately, close quote. 5. Simulated surge visualization tools. New technologies allow forecasters to show real-time 3D projections of how surge could enter a town, street by street. This visual evidence is often more compelling to the public than abstract numbers. But even with these advances, preparedness still hinges on trust. If people don't believe the warning, or don't believe it applies to them, they won't act. That's why emergency agencies are working to build community-based awareness networks, where trained local leaders help interpret alerts in ways that neighbors understand and believe. Because in the case of Adalia, delayed action wasn't caused by a lack of data, it was caused by a lag in belief. The science was clear, the warnings were on time, but the response was not. And again we return to the heart of this series, silence before the storm. What makes it so deadly is not just the quiet, it's what the quiet hides. A rapidly falling pressure system, a surge moving invisibly beneath calm seas, a heat-fueled storm building in strength while the streets remain dry. If our disaster response systems don't evolve to match the tempo of today's hurricanes, the silent phase will continue to be the deadliest. In the next section, we'll examine how climate change is rewriting storm behavior globally, and what scientists are discovering about faster, wetter, and more unpredictable hurricanes, not just in the US, but across the planet. Because Adalia won't be the last storm to arrive in silence, but it can be the last one we misread if we learn from it now. Lens. In the aftermath of Hurricane Adalia, what stole that time? The quiet. Forecasts were accurate, emergency services were ready, but people misread the signs. Our goal with Crisis Lens is to change that. By the time skies darken, it may already be too late. So what should we listen for? How can we recognize the hidden signals? Coming up next in our full report, how the calm before Adalia followed the same playbook as other deadly storms, and why recognizing this pattern might be the most important survival skill in a warming world. In the days following Hurricane Adalia, stories emerged across Florida's Gulf Coast. Stories of near misses, close calls, and moments of realization that came just a little too late. I thought we had more time, one resident of Steinhatchee told reporters as he waded through the knee-high water that had entered his living room. It's a familiar phrase. We've heard it after Katrina, after Harvey, after Ian, and now after Adalia. But what if we didn't? What if all the time we had was hidden in that eerie silence? The answer, experts say, lies in how we rebuild. Not just homes and roads, but awareness and systems. The post-storm phase is not only about recovery, it's a rare moment of clarity. When the wind has passed and the water recedes, people are finally open to listening, changing, and preparing differently. And that window of change is one we must not waste. Let's begin with what went wrong during Adalia. Many residents ignored the early warnings because the weather looked fine. Rapid intensification was not communicated clearly or early enough to trigger full evacuations. Social media misinformation downplayed the storm, creating a false sense of reassurance. Community shelters were underutilized due to lack of trust or clarity on risk zones. Each of these factors contributed not only to physical damage, but to preventable suffering. But some things also went right, and those hold the keys to better preparation in the future. In Levy County, a newly formed community response team went door to door with printed surge maps the night before landfall. Over 80% of targeted households evacuated, far above the state average. In Wakulla County, an automated alert system used AI to identify mobile home clusters most at risk, sending early text alerts before the general warning. These alerts were credited with reducing last-minute emergency calls by 60%. These examples show that when science, technology, and trusted human contact combine, response improves, sometimes dramatically. So what's next? We must start treating silence as a signal, not an absence. Here are 5 community-level strategies emerging in the wake of Adalia. 1. Silent zone drills. Just like earthquake or fire drills, these simulate the pre-storm phase where conditions seem calm, but action must be taken. By running these drills in schools and neighborhoods, communities learn to act based on forecast signals, not sky conditions. 2. Localized risk communication hubs. Centralized alerts aren't always enough. Empowering libraries, community centers, and churches to become localized hubs for storm updates ensures that even those without smartphones or internet can stay informed. 3. Storm signal literacy programs. Teaching residents, especially in coastal and rural areas, how to interpret surge maps, barometric trends, and satellite images can dramatically improve decision-making. These are not high-tech skills, they're practical survival tools. 4. Pre-season evacuation plans. Many people wait until a storm is named to consider evacuation, but modern storms don't give that luxury. Community-wide what-if sessions ahead of hurricane season can help families pre-select routes, destinations, and timelines before panic sets in. 5. Integrated alert systems across platforms. A 2023 review showed that inconsistent alert wording between TV, mobile apps, and government emails reduced response rates. Unifying language and trigger points across all platforms will avoid mixed messages in future emergencies. One of the most powerful ideas coming out of post-Adalia research is this: every storm leaves data behind, not just meteorological, but behavioral. We can now analyze how fast people evacuated based on messaging tone, which zones ignored warnings and why, which formats, text, map, animation, voice, were most effective in triggering response. This behavioral analytics layer is what's helping emergency planners evolve storm prep into a smarter, more human-centered system. And it's not just about Florida. The rise of ultra-fast hurricanes, those that go from tropical storm to major hurricane in less than 36 hours, is a global issue. In 2021, Typhoon Rai in the Philippines and Cyclone Amphan in the Bay of Bengal both shocked meteorologists with their sudden growth and devastating landfall. This means every coastal nation now faces the same challenge. How do we teach people to act before they feel fear? Because in the new era of climate-driven storms, fear often comes too late, and silence, once mistaken for safety, becomes the storm's deadliest disguise. The final lesson from Adalia isn't just about the storm itself, it's about time. Every moment of quiet before landfall is not extra time, it is borrowed time. And how we use it will decide who lives, who loses, and whether we keep repeating the same mistakes or finally change course. In the next and final section, we'll bring together the full science, the human cost, and the new roadmap forward. How communities, governments, and individuals can transform silent warnings into life-saving action. Because the next storm is coming, and it too may arrive quietly. There's a strange paradox at the heart of every major hurricane. The most dangerous moments don't always look dangerous. They're quiet, they're clear, and they're easy to ignore. Hurricane Adalia taught us this lesson once again, violently and without mercy. In its final hours before landfall, Adalia offered what many mistook as a reprieve: blue skies, fading winds, and a haunting stillness. But beneath that quiet barometric pressure was plummeting. Sea levels were rising, and millions of gallons of storm surge were racing toward the shoreline. Out of sight, out of mind. That silence wasn't a pause. It was a trap that caught thousands off guard. But Adalia is just one storm in a growing pattern. A pattern shaped by rising ocean temperatures, stronger pressure gradients, and faster intensification cycles, all of which are linked to a changing global climate. Storms today don't follow yesterday's rules. They don't give us days of wind and rain to prepare. They accelerate, they reorganize, and then they strike, suddenly. So where does that leave us? It leaves us at a turning point. We've seen that the science exists, forecasting tools have improved, satellite data is faster, AI models are detecting intensifying earlier than ever before. But the gap is not in the forecast. The gap is in the response. As we've shown throughout this video, the biggest threat from the next storm may not be the wind or rain. It may be how people interpret the silence before it hits. Let's review the key takeaways from this investigation. 1. Atmospheric silence is not atmospheric safety. A drop in wind or a moment of sunshine does not signal the end of the threat. It often means the eye or core is consolidating strength. 2. Pressure drop is a hidden countdown. When barometric pressure falls rapidly, especially over warm waters, expect the storm to intensify and do so fast. Waiting until visible signs appear can be fatal. 3. Public messaging must adapt. Calm weather requires louder, clearer alerts, silence alerts, surge alerts, pressure-based warnings. People need to know you won't hear it coming. 4. Behavioral bias is predictable, but changeable. With better education, simulated drills, and trusted local communicators, we can shift the public's instinct from wait and see to trust and act. 5. Community action multiplies survival. When neighborhoods organize, share information, and respond as a unit, their odds improve dramatically. Silence becomes something shared and addressed. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: silence itself is now part of the disaster. It's not just the thing that happens before the storm. It's a mechanism of harm. It delays decisions. It creates false comfort. It drowns warnings in doubt. And if we don't reframe how we view those quiet moments, we will continue to lose time, lives, and communities. So what can you do? You can become one of the first to change the narrative. Learn how to read pressure trends and radar signals. Follow official alerts, even when conditions feel too calm. Speak up when others downplay the threat. Your voice might be the one that changes someone's mind. Support early warning initiatives, climate resilience programs, and infrastructure upgrades that account for fast-moving storms. And most of all, remember what the silence before Adalia really was. It wasn't peace. It wasn't safety. It was the final breath before devastation. If we can teach just one more person to recognize that moment for what it is, we gain time. If we teach a community, we save lives. And if we prepare on a national scale, we transform disaster into resilience. The storm will come, but silence doesn't have to win. Open quote, stay informed, stay alert, stay ahead. Subscribe to Crisis Lens for science-driven insights on the world's most extreme weather threats. We break down the data, the patterns, and the global signals, so that next time you'll be ready. Don't wait for the wind. Listen to the quiet. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. Share this video with your community, because the next warning may sound like nothing at all.